What's going on, everyone? I've wanted to make this video for a while now, and I'm hoping that this helps the few fingerboarders out there who prefer tight trucks over loose trucks. I feel like loose trucks have been the current preference for a long time now. Every time I go to events and I try other people's decks, everyone has loose trucks. I feel like bushing packs nowadays also fewer and fewer of them include the usual amount of washers as well. So I want to share a little bit of the things I've learned along the way ever since I started seriously fingerboarding in 2006. I've ridden tight trucks for the entire time I've ever fingerboarded. And so I just now recently have found the perfect sweet spot of products and techniques. So I'm hoping that this helps. Before we get into specifics, one thing I want to point out that I've noticed is that the shorter the hanger of the truck, fewer things really matter. So for example, something like 26 millimeters, the distance from the middle of the hanger to the edge of the board is a lot shorter than something like 32 or 34. Here's 32. And even something like 29. 29's that sweet spot, but the difference is between 26 and 32 is that 32, you have a lot more room between the wheel and the middle of the hanger, so whenever you push down or apply pressure or whatever, that is always going to have a lot more force, which is going to make the bushing squish more. So 26 millimeters, you can really use anything and you'll get the desired tightness just depending on how you tighten your kingpin or your lock nut. So what I want to show you today is how I'm going to set up the 32 millimeter inverted kingpin dynamics on a 32 millimeter deck. So to do this, I'm going to be needing a couple of things. I'm going to be using a fresh set of bushings. I'm going to be using Sponsor Me tape bushings. These are molded bushings, so they're not O-rings. They have a tapered top. They come with pivot cup, but I'm not going to be using that, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And I'm not going to be using the washers, and I'll explain why when we get to that point. I'm also going to be using, like I just said, pivot cup material. This is something you may have gotten in a fingerboard order or had it thrown in or seen on a website and not know what exactly it does. So I'll explain how to use this as well. And lastly, I'm going to be using these very specific short kingpins, which are also by Sponsor Me tape, and this is the secret sauce. So for those of you who want super tight trucks and you are trying to get it but not having much luck with the kingpins that you're using, from stock trucks like Dynamic and stuff like that, this is the answer why, so we'll get to that in a little bit. So I just mentioned the short kingpins and why those are very integral to this whole process, and I want to show you an example here. This is a set of 32 millimeter dynamics with inverted kingpins. These are the stock kingpins, all right? These are the ones that you will get if you get the inverted kind. And so one thing I want to show you is that with my tight trucks, you'll see here, you see how the kingpin is starting to point out of the bottom of the base plate because I have tightened these a lot. Something that people don't do anymore on decks, which is something that used to be done back in the day, is people used to drill holes in between the bottom two truck holes on the fingerboard because the kingpin on old tech deck trucks used to stick out from the bottom, so you would never be able to get the trucks flush. Now, modern day trucks like Dynamic, most people ride these loose and they usually sit flat on the deck, so over time, most things, especially any normal trucks like Black River trucks, they all sit flat, so no one's doing that anymore. Because I ride tight and a lot of people don't, I've encountered this a lot. The more and more I tighten this, and I'll show you, I'll loosen it up a little bit. I just loosened it up and you see there is no kingpin down on the bottom. So before I learned how to do this, I would tighten my trucks all the way, put them on a board, and it would never sit flat. And because of that, I would end up stripping my bolts because I'd be trying really hard to get the bolts to catch the threads on the truck, and it would strip the base plate. Earlier, I had mentioned that we're not going to be using the washers from the Sponsor Me Tape pack, and that's only because I prefer a larger bottom washer and a smaller washer top. And that helps a lot because with softer bushings and wider trucks, like I mentioned earlier, so we're going to be working with 32 millimeter trucks, we need enough space here when you are applying pressure for that bushing to squish evenly. And I've noticed that if you rock much tighter trucks than normal, softer bushings will squish and start to almost squish on top of a bushing depending on how small it is. If you ride loose trucks, you're never going to experience that. One thing you'll notice about the Sponsor Me Tape bushings is that there's two different sizes. So I'll be using the taller ones, which are on the left, on the top, and the more squat ones on the bottom. And then, like I mentioned too, these black kingpins, this is the secret sauce, and just what I explained about the stock kingpins being too long, now you'll be able to tighten these a lot more and never have to worry about your kingpin digging into the deck and hitting that point where they just won't go any deeper and your trucks will not get tighter. This is the answer to that. And then lastly, we're going to be using this pivot cut material, which I will show you as the first step. The first step is to find something sharp. I like to have a razor blade like this. And what you're going to be doing is, you see the length of this little nub here. You're basically just going to cut a little bit longer than that. So I just eyeball it. Probably about this much. Okay. So I'm going to do that again. Roughly find where it is, cut it off. And then you're going to take your hangers, okay? And you're going to fit that right on top. And you can always cut a little bit more off once it's on the truck, which I'm going to do. So now your trucks should look like this. Okay, so assuming you know how to set up a truck, the order is kingpin, washer, the small one, taller tapered bushing, then through the hanger, and on the other side you're going to take the smaller squat tapered bushing, but make sure the flat side goes up into the kingpin. And to top it all off, you're going to take that larger washer and put it on the bottom. So now when you take your deck and you're going to be putting these on the base plates, you're going to put the pivot cut material in this hole, the larger hole on the outside, and then you're going to line it up with the threads on the inside, the smaller hole. You're then going to hold that and make sure it doesn't move, and you're going to keep it level because you want this to be tightened so the bushings squish evenly. And you're going to just screw it in. So what you should have now is a very evenly squished truck with no give. All right, I hope this helps. It has certainly been now something that I set up all my trucks with. Even the 26 millimeters, even though I say that doesn't really matter, you'll notice still a difference. But certainly, I would say if you try this with O-rings, you'll probably get the same effect, but the bigger the bushing, if it tapers and stuff like that, the better it'll squish. O-rings, I've noticed, are softer, and so sometimes they will squish unevenly, and sometimes like squish out from the washer. So just keep that in mind, but I will say, you have to try and find what's good for you and what works for you. This works for me, and I know that the few people that I've seen that prefer tight trucks have often opted for finding harder bushings. Sometimes they're 3D printed. Other times it's just the material. I know that flat face, I've always enjoyed the Teflon bushings. Those were something that I used for a really, really long time. I've noticed that the techniques I described in this video, including the short kingpin and the different sized washers, will make most bushings work. So I hope this helps you find what you like.